Hello, everyone. It is Dr. Ray here. We are here for our next episode of Purpose Over Passion. Within this next hour, we are going to be talking about abstinence in a way you've never heard it talked about before. So, if you're ready to really have a changed life and you're really ready to see things in a different lens, lean in, do what you have to do, whether it's go take care of what you got to do, come back if you're watching the replay, but really lean in because it's going to transform your life. I have with me Coach David Burrus. He is an absolute amazing leader. And I'm just so honored, really, to have you here with us. Over time, we've just seen abstinence either not talked about or talked about in a way that really hasn't been helpful, especially in our adulthood and our adult lives. And so, before we jump into our topic, we're really going to be talking about leadership and strength in abstinence. Before we jump into that, can you just share just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, guys. Dr. Ray, grateful to be here with you. Guys, my name is David Burrus. I'm a life and marriage coach. Very excited about the opportunity to talk about abstinence. I have my own experience with abstinence that we'll get into in just a few moments. But as she said, I just want you to lean in here. We're going to talk about it from a much different lens than perhaps you've heard it talked about before. And so thank you for having me, Dr. Ray.
Thank you for being here. I often call us David Burrus, so I often say coach or DB. So if I use those terms anonymously, you guys know who I'm speaking with. But you're someone who is really respected in our global community, just in the relationship space, in the leadership space, in the purpose space. And I remember you sharing that you and Tanisha, you and Queen T had been absent for a few years prior to being married. And I remember having a conversation with you, and I was thinking, it would be great for us to talk about how, men lead in all areas, including abstinence. And one of the things you shared with me was, well, it was really because of who you chose
That's right.
that allowed you guys to be successful, because there were definitely times where, she was stronger than you were. And if
Yeah.
it wasn't for, who you selected and who you chose, then that may not have gone in that manner. And I think a lot of times, just in leadership, we always think of strength, that the man always has to be the strongest one in a room to lead. And we don't necessarily think about that mutual accountability all the time, or the strength that's played, in a man's role, even allowing his counterpart to lead. So I know I just said a whole lot. But if you can just share a little bit, I mean, you can share a little bit about your story, but really, even in that mutual accountability, or not always having to be the strongest the way that society defines strong in a room, even when we're talking about abstinence.
Yeah, so Tanisha and I, we met when we were 18. We got married at 28. Um, and there was a period of time when we broke up and we both kind of went our separate ways. We didn't think we were going to get back together. And God worked on our hearts. She became really sold out for Christ, and she was abstinent, and then I became sold out for Christ. I was abstinent. I was operating in ministry. And then we got back together. Now, to give some backstory, when we were dating as kids, we weren't abstinent. So we were young college kids. We were having sex. We were just, we weren't living an abstinent lifestyle. So when we broke up and got back together, we were both very intentional about being abstinent. But the interesting thing is that being back with her and having prior experience with her really made it challenging because I knew, right? I knew what it could be and what it could be like. So in our abstinent journey, we both valued abstinence, but my wife was in many cases a lot stronger than I was. And her being as strong as she was really helped us be as strong as we were. Because if it was up to me, we would have slipped probably two or three times. But she just held it down for us. And so I'm glad she did because when we got to our wedding and even that night in our honeymoon, it just made a difference. We just really felt God's presence on our marriage and on our intimacy because we decided to wait. So yeah, um, men have to hear that sometimes we're not always going to be the strongest. Now that's not giving us an excuse to not be strong, But the reality is that we have to learn at times how to be weak. Bible scripture says it this way, that his strength is made perfect in weakness. And so sometimes we have to learn how to be weak so that God can be strong. And if we're trying to be strong on our own, we're going to find ourselves in trouble.
That's awesome. And I know that, it's so important to definitely lean on God and gain strength from Him. Like you said, if we lean on things our own, we're often in trouble. And yet, sexual abstinence is typically something that's dealt with in isolation, just one person or just one couple. Not something that we typically talk about or surround ourselves with, unless it's a hey, don't do this, type conversation. There's not really those tools and that support. But you work with men, a lot. And can you talk a little bit about the role of brotherhood or the role of just being around and surrounding yourself with the right people? Like how can men build, or how can we build a support system just even in this area?
Yeah. So, scripture says that two are better than one, well, because we have a greater return. And we often think about that scripture as a greater return in the work we do. But we also have a much greater return in the areas of accountability, the areas of our values. So what I've learned in life, in every aspect of my life, is I'm always better when I'm in community, and I'm always better when I'm in community with men who are moving in the same direction as I am. So having those relationships, having that community, it just strengthens you. Um, and let me just also say this for the men who are single and abstinent, who will one day be married, you're gonna need community at every aspect of your life, right? Because even transitioning into marriage, you need men around you who will undergird you, who will affirm you. There's sometimes when you will think that you're the only one who's thinking a thought, and being in community with other men who are like-minded and moving in the same direction makes a difference. And this last thing I'll add is the more I realized, the more that I start working on me and the more that I started healing, the more I had to discontinue certain relationships, because there are some people in my life, and perhaps you're watching this, there's some people in your life who fuel your foolery, right? And you don't want people who fuel the foolery. You want people who fuel your faith, fuel your courage, fuel your wisdom. And so I would ask you to even assess the people around you. Are they fueling the things that you are struggling with? And if they are, you have to make a decision. You have to disconnect. You have to find your way into community with people that are healthy and balanced and can help you move into that right direction.
So true. And, iron sharpens iron. So having, other people that are strong, maybe even in different areas, sharpening each other, definitely is helpful. I remember a while ago thinking, well, what would happen if iron wasn't sharper? Right?
Mm,
Can a blunt iron sharpen another blunt iron? No.
yeah.
In sense, there will be a whole lot of issues. One, the one that's not sharp, or the one that's blunt, would actually get harmed and hurt by the one that is sharp.
Wow.
Two is if you're thinking you're getting sharper and you're not, and then you go to be used or for function, then you find that your function is not purposeful. You're not
That's right.
able to cut through, whatever it is that you need to cut through in order to be at function. And so we definitely want to just consider, iron sharpens iron. We definitely want to put ourselves in community and put ourselves, around other spaces. How does that look? Because I know in today's society, abstinence is kind of countercultural. Like it's not really a popular thing to do. I interviewed a lot of guys, and they were all sharing that. Most of them were sharing that they were really the only one in their circle. How do you really find that accountability, or how do you seek out, that brotherhood? What does that even look like?
Well, I think it starts with knowing what your vision is for your life, what your mission is for your life, and living that out first, right? You don't want to build a team without knowing the vision and the mission. So you have to know what your vision is, what your mission is, why you need to be abstinent. And I think I look at the example of Christ. When Christ built his team, what he did was he went to where they were. He didn't expect them to come to where he was. He went to where the type of men that he needed to be around were, and he observed them from a distance. And then the thing that Christ did that I've learned to do, and this will help those who are watching build a strong team. I call my team my personal board of directors. All right. What he did was he said, "Hey, I want you to drop your nets, follow me, because I will make you fishers of men." What he did in that moment was he promised them, he promised that he would add value to their life. He promised that he would elevate them. And so one of the things that we want to do when we're building our personal board of directors is identify what value do I want to add to their life? What value, how do I want to help them? How do I want to elevate them and communicate that? What I've learned is this, that it's always best to ask for someone's heart before you ask for their hand. And so instead of asking people to do things for you first, we're talking about leadership today. You want to ask for their heart. And so you want to make sure that you're adding value. How can I support you? How can I help you? What mission are you on? And building relationship that way makes a huge difference. And then making sure that you are adding that value that you have promised. And then they will in turn add value to you. Here's why, because the Bible says it this way: be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatever man sows, that shall he also reap. So you want to make sure that you are a giver of what you want to be receiving, and building your relationships that way. And then finding yourself in environments and communities with people who share the same values as you so that the relationships are natural. You don't have to force them.
Nice, nice. Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And then it also provides that opportunity to then shift and share that information with others.
That's
It
right.
helps you build a legacy, whether it be through your family and through your seed or through, whatever it is that you're building. Which kind of brings me to, I don't know if it's necessarily another subject, but when we're talking about absence, I think for a lot of times for men, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it feels more like a pause. Like I'm stopping, I'm pausing, um, you know, I'm preparing, I'm not paying attention to anything, I'm not looking at anything. So how do we, I guess, look at it more so like, yes, you're preparing, but it's really not a pause from, but really a building to,
Yeah.
building towards the legacy, building towards what the relationship or what it is they are trying to accomplish. Like sexual discipline isn't I'm stopping doing something, but it actually plays a role in my legacy.
Yeah. I think it's critical to know the value of abstinence. I think if you don't know well, Miles Monroe said it best. He said, if you don't know the purpose of a thing, abuse is inevitable. It's possible to abuse abstinence when you show up trying to be abstinent for the wrong reason or in the wrong ways, almost like fasting, right? If you're fasting and not praying, you're just on a diet. So abstinence without vision, without purpose, without clarity is just you're not having sex. You want to make sure, you want to be clear about why you're doing this, what value it's going to add to your life. Because here's the thing about abstinence, you also want to be able to place a demand on the expectation of sacrifice. I want to repeat that. When it comes to abstinence, you need to be able to place a demand on the expectation of sacrifice. Whenever you sacrifice something, there ought to be an expectation on the other end of it. And if your abstinence doesn't have an expectation, then you're just not having sex. So I would ask the people who are listening, what is the expectation? Are you abstinent because you want God to grow you deeper in your faith? Are you abstinent because you want to hear God more clearly? Are you abstinent because you want better relationships? So you want to be able to place a demand on the expectation. When you don't know why you're being abstinent, it becomes so challenging at times to do it, and even more challenging to experience the fruit of it. And so those who are abstinent now or even thinking about being abstinent, I would challenge you to identify, why am I doing this? What am I expecting on the other end of this?
That's powerful. Just even with that, knowing your why and your expectation, and then also being able to like implement some of the disciplines. How did that come over into your marriage? Like, were you able to utilize any of that just even as you became married and as you've been married over 20 years now, but
Yeah.
was there any way that you could utilize that in marriage?
Yeah, absolutely. Without being too graphic, my wife and I, when we were absent, we still kissed, we still hugged, we still cuddled. Um, and as a result, we still suffered and sacrificed. And so that suffering and that sacrifice has walked with us through every aspect of our marriage. If you're going to be married to anybody, two things you're going to have to learn how to do is suffer with them and sacrifice with them. So we can always point back to the times when we suffered and we sacrificed for our marriage in abstinence and in singleness. And so even now, as we're married, 22 years this year, we are still suffering and still sacrificing together as a team for our marriage. The benefit of that is we did it together. It wasn't just one of us, right? When it comes to abstinence, both of you have to participate. You've got to both be on board. And so that you're establishing a culture and a value in your marriage before you get married. Ray, I never answered this question. This is good.
I never thought of it before.
This is good.
And this is good.
Yeah. You want to, so that leads us to, you want to make sure, and this is not, now we're going to shift out of abstinence just for a moment. We'll bring it back, but you want to make sure whoever it is that you are um, committing to do life with, that their heart is a heart of servitude and of sacrifice. Because if it is not, whatever culture you establish in singleness as you all are building, you're going to take that same culture into marriage. And if you don't recognize it and you don't shift it, if it's a wrong culture, you'll spend your whole marriage suffering for the wrong reasons. So we were laying a foundation in singleness, and that foundation was abstinence. Hey, we're doing this, and the root of it, or the substratum of why we were doing it, was because we want to really please God with our marriage. We want to honor Him with our marriage and honor Him with our bodies. And I submit to you that we have had challenges in our marriage over these last 22 years, and that foundation that we laid of honoring God with our body, honoring God with our servitude and sacrifice has carried us through some of the hardest seasons in marriage.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I've always, considered, there's going to be ups and downs in marriage. It's not always going to be, sunshine and butterflies. There's definitely going to be things that you have to work through together. There's going to be times when you may not be at the same place. Just, hearing from my married friends, there's going to be times where one person's all in and another person's
That's
all
right.
out. And like, you just may not be always fighting together. So I
Yep.
really never considered just how establishing that just in honoring our bodies, just establishing that as we are preparing for marriage, how that creates that culture where we're now putting
Yep.
that sacrifice in. We're now
Yeah.
like, okay, we can glorify God with it. We may have sex in marriage.
Yep.
Praise God. Can't wait. But definitely we can still honor God in other areas in that sacrifice and putting that servitude, with each other. So I think that's really, really beautiful. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about what about vision? Like how does, a lot of times I feel like when we choose the wrong person or even if the wrong activities, it distracts us so much from the vision that we have for marriage, the vision that we have for ourselves. I think we begin to get cloudy, like we don't even see, as clear. How does abstinence or sexual discipline play a role in that clarity and vision?
Yeah, what it does is it really roots you and centers you. Because again, remember, we're establishing culture. We have to stress this. Abstinence is an establishment of culture, right? And so what that does is now when we're abstaining, it really roots us to the thing that we said, this is what God told us to do. This is the direction God told us to go in, and this is how He told us to do it. And one of the values that we have for this vision is abstinence, right? So it's one of the things that roots us to the value system that we have established for the marriage that we desire to have. And if we were to take that a little bit deeper, it is also an immense exhibition of faith. Because what it says is when I'm abstaining and you're abstaining, we're really trusting God that on the other side of this thing that we're going to call marriage, that I'm going to be for you and you're going to be for me, even in a sexual way. So now what that does is it puts God in complete control of every aspect of our marriage, including sexually, because I'm saying, God, I really trust that this person is going to be able to meet my needs. What it also does, though, Dr. Ray, is it helps us now communicate on a much deeper level our expectations because I got to tell you something I can't show you, right? And
Mhm.
so even as we're building what we have to be very communicative and very expressive, and even at times respectfully and what's the word I want? Respectfully explicit, right? Because when you start moving toward marriage, you got to really talk about, okay, here's what I need, here's what I don't need, here's what I think I like, here's what I don't think I like, here's how long I want it to happen, here's how many times a week I think. So you got to be explicit. That requires communication and requires immense measures of faith because now I got to trust God. God, these are things that I desire. I'm gonna put everything in your hands. I'm gonna trust in you with all my heart, believing that you're gonna deliver on what you promised you would deliver on.
How do we get more people a part of this conversation? So, like, I think about, like, in my mind, there's 10 different areas. I have an academic, operational mind. So, like, there's 10 different areas that I really think we need to be as singles that we need to really think about, look at, and honestly, abstinence is like the overflow of these 10 areas, right? They help with other areas in our life. But so often people only talk about one thing. The thing I always hear people say if they say they're abstinent is how long they've been abstinent. That's the only conversation I had. Don't have sex on. I've been abstinent 30 years. I've been abstinent 2 months. I've been abstinent 6 years. And I just think that time is a poor indicator for abstinent success, right?
Mhm.
I honestly think I was more successful at 3 years of abstinence where I was submitted to God and had to deal with relationships and knew how I could pick up the phone call to call if I wanted to than I was with 8 years of abstinence where I wasn't dating or I wasn't, interacting. And for each person, that's different. So I just don't think that time is a great indicator. But I do think there's some areas that we just don't talk about because we're dealing with it in isolation and not in community. It's taboo to speak about. How do we open up this conversation and make it less of, I guess, a taboo subject or less of a awkward subject or I don't need to talk about that, I'm grown subject, or like how do we open that up? Any suggestions?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I think the first thing is that I think sometimes we over spiritualize it. And when we over spiritualize it, it almost feels like it's something that's not attainable, right? Because if my walk with God isn't where it needs to be, then why should I expect my abstinence to be, right? Whereas as if we should probably start looking at it as a value system and something abstinence as almost like a boundary that guards this very thing that I am that's so valuable, right? And so I think normalizing it, taking some of the religious context out of it, not taking God out of it, but the religious context, the rule making out of it, right? And making it, no, this is a value system that I have. This is a boundary that I've established. And it really safeguards the value that I see in myself. I think doing it that way and pointing people more to the value of who they are as a point, as opposed to the discipline of abstinence, right?
Mm.
There's a discipline of abstinence, and then there's a discipleship of abstinence, and then there's value system. And I think we really need to highlight the value system of abstinence and why I do it and why I do it for me, right? Not for anybody else. And not to be religious. I do it because I value who I am. So I think that conversation would really help a lot. I think more men need to talk about abstinence. I think when we get men leading out in this area, like all other areas, it just makes a difference, right? When men are speaking up and men are leading out, it almost normalizes. And here's the truth about that. For the guys who are listening, you have to stop being so silent about it because there's a leadership aspect of abstinence that we don't talk about. And you can lead as a man and even lead in this area. And here's the other thing that I want the guys who are watching to hear. Man, God is looking for some people who will pioneer in this area, right? You may be the first of your kind to talk about it. And as a result, you have an opportunity to present abstinence in a way that has never been heard or seen before. Like, why isn't it cool? Right? Why aren't we talking about it from a perspective of, no, I want to choose this because this is a beautiful lifestyle to have. And so, for the guys who are listening, man, I just want you to hear we need more men who will pioneer in this area, who will lead out and speak of it from a healed perspective, and not from a broken perspective. I got a feeling you about to ask me what the difference is between, yeah, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. I was just thinking that because you do hear more often now, I think people talking about, they may not call it abstinence. You have semen retention, and you have, just all of these different terminologies for not engaging sexually. And, you know, it can be from people in the church, it can be from people out of the church. So what is the difference between from a Hill perspective and from a non-Hill perspective?
I think a Hill perspective speaks to it as we've been talking about it this whole time, but speaks to it from a more value-based conversation. Why this is so valuable to me. Whenever you talk about value, especially as it relates to yourself, you're speaking from a more aware perspective, right? When I'm talking about value, that means I spent some time with me and identified this is what makes me great. Whereas when you talk about it from a broken perspective, it's the discipline of it. It's the I got to do this because God said. We don't ever want to force ourselves to do anything for the sake of being forced to do it, right? So I think we really want to speak to it from a value perspective. And what happens is when I look at my value, when I look at who I am as a person and what makes me so incredibly amazing in this earth, it should impact every area of my life. I should want to guard that, right? I should want to keep that from hurt, harm, from danger. And so, abstinence, if I look at it from that perspective, it's really not me not having sex. Abstinence is me guarding, safeguarding this value that I have that I can't give to just anybody. So, I think that's the healed perspective, speaking to it from a more value based mindset as opposed to a works discipline based mindset.
That's awesome. A lot of things just went through my head, but one of the things is many years ago, and you probably don't even remember, you probably don't even remember saying this, but many years ago, I remember you um, talking about basically intimacy in the sexual relationship and how, God, we definitely serve a graceful God, but how one choice, 5 minutes, however long, can derail us for years
Yeah.
and walking in the thing and walking in the purpose that God has for us. And I thought that was pretty powerful because I don't know if we always think about it in that moment. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, I want this pleasure, or this is available, or I'm lonely, or whatever it is, the experience that's being felt. But we don't think about it often from this is something that God has functioned me to do. This is a purpose that God has for me. And it's not that I can't be effective, but now what I could have had right now, I have to wait 2 years, 5 years, or do it something differently because my focus was in the wrong place. Almost like the children of Israel. Like I could have been right there with all the abundance, big grapes, everything available to me, but because I don't want to deal with what obstacle is there, I'm now going to be spending 40 years in the desert, not experiencing the inheritance that God has for me. And
Yeah.
so that came to my mind just as you were speaking and as you were talking.
Yeah. And I think you have to link it. So if you're not linking your abstinence to your life's purpose, it becomes more challenging to do it. Right. One of the things that when Tanisha and I were abstinent, young, and dating and courting, engaged, man, we were both really on fire for God and we were moving in purpose. I was just starting out in ministry and I just didn't want to mess anything up. Like I didn't want that to impede on me hearing from God. And so linking that to something really made the difference as well. It becomes so much more challenging to be abstinent if you don't have a reason for why you do it, right? If you have nothing, if you have nothing. So we also have to understand that when we open ourselves up to people sexually, man, we're inviting that person to become one with us. Sex was never designed to be turned off. It was only designed to be turned on. And so God only intended for you to be with the person you're going to be with for the rest of your life in marriage. And so as a result, when you do invite people into your life sexually, you're inviting them to become one with you, to tie themselves around your soul. And that really impedes on your purpose, right? Because now when they're gone, you're still dragging their soul around trying to fulfill God's will for your life. And that's problematic, right? So if nothing else, you want to do it because, man, I don't want anything impeding on my forward progress in God.
That's amazing. When I think about the soul, we're not just talking about, I think a lot of times people think about the person, like, oh, you have sex with this person, you have tie with this person, you can't stop thinking about this person, right? But people don't really, I don't think people really consider like the soul. That's like all the thoughts, all the breath, the life of that person being tied into you. So that's their struggles. That's the spiritual things that they're fighting with. Excuse me, all of those things being tied into you. And so people begin to fight battles, not even knowing sometimes that they're fighting battles that have nothing to do with sex, that have nothing to do with that person. And they don't know why they're going through these cycles over and over again. I was just talking about that with the last gentleman, like cycle after cycle after cycle, trying to break a cycle. But that's because they have created a covenant. They've created a vow to something, to someone, and sometimes that included the things that they were vowed to that you weren't aware of.
That's
And we're
right.
doing that with multiple people.
That's
And
right.
that's just very derailing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not even just for purpose. Well, and I guess this is combined, but derailing from just who you are.
That's right. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
dangerous. Well,
definitely a dangerous place to be in. Well, I am so excited. I did something yesterday, Coach, that you are aware of. I booked a flight, but it wasn't a flight for myself. It was a flight for you to come to Delaware
mm,
for our Purpose Over Passion Summit on February 1st. And I
mm.
am so, so, so excited to have you here. We are going to have some fun. We're going to have some great conversations. And I'm just excited. I'm
Yeah.
very, very excited.
I've never been to Delaware before, so this is gonna be fun. This is gonna be amazing.
A lot of people are like, Delaware, you're in Delaware? A lot of people have never been to Delaware before. So I'm
Yeah.
definitely excited to have you here.
Likewise. It's gonna be
Yeah,
fun. Yeah,
it'll
it's gonna be
it'll
fun.
be a good time. We have you, a couple other gentlemen speakers. So definitely, people can just go ahead and register. It's bit.ly / purpose over passion. And I'll put it in a link as well. Just basically register, come, enjoy. It'll include lunch, good conversation, and some skills that you can leave with.
I love it. Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to thank you. Is there anything else you think we should cover before getting off?
No, I just want to celebrate you for doing this work. This is not one of those things that, this is not to be cliche, but this is not the sexiest conversation on the planet, right? There are so many other things that are more sexy. But I think you're doing a wonderful job of putting sexy back into abstinence.
Oh,
Abstinence is sexy, right? And it can be. So thank you for the work you're doing to help others really lean in and discover their purpose in abstinence.
thank you so much. You've actually encouraged some of this, probably more than you know. So I looked, it was actually 47 guys that I reached out to. I interviewed about 30 of them after a conversation that I had with someone, and he was telling me abstinent men don't exist. I was like, they do exist.
Wow.
I've met some. And so I reached out to 47 abstinent men, interviewed over 30 of them. About a year after that, you had a class. You have a community, where many subjects are talked about. And there was a class, we were talking about intimacy, and the conversation that happened and occurred during that class. Some of the ladies were just frustrated and talking about, well, I've been abstinent for a long time, but I don't see abstinent men. There was just a lot of conversation. And even there was talk about, intimacy in marriage. It was just a really good conversation. And you and I were having a conversation after that, and we were talking about some different subjects, talking about some different areas. And you were like, Dr. Ray, you should make a course on abstinence. And I was like, no, I should not.
I remember that.
And what we did do was that online summit.
Yeah.
And I did end up making a course too. But that really helped me a lot because it really flipped the switch in my head. Because what you didn't know, because I wasn't expressing, I don't think, my frustrations. I think I was talking about how, in the conversation we were having after, I think I was talking about how so often we talk about what men should be expressing or what men should be doing or how men should be thinking. And there are men who are like, you know what, I'm going to change the trajectory of my life, and they begin to make differences and changes. And I was sharing that very often we don't look at it from the boy.
Yeah.
Like, we don't look at it from when someone is young. We don't
Yeah.
look at it from our nieces, or not our nieces, but our nephews and our children. We don't look at it from that aspect and begin to train and teach and develop in even these areas. Even for me, I wasn't really dating at home. I didn't start dating until I was states away from home. So I didn't have that community, that village, even in the processes.
Yeah.
So we are talking about that, when we came to this. And so it really flipped a switch in my head, because at that moment and at that time, although I was abstinent, my mindset, my value, my choice of abstinence, which is one of the 10 areas I think we need to pay attention to, was definitely off.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I was not expecting to be abstinent this long.
Yeah.
I was not. So when I began to study it, things begin to click, and it clicked in my head, and my vision and my sight changed, and my perspective changed. So I actually just want to thank you, because you really did open by pushing me and saying, go ahead and make this something in this source for the
Absolutely.
people. It
Yeah.
really helped me
Yeah. Good
as
stuff.
well. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. My pleasure. Yeah. Thank you for having me again, too. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. That's the Purpose Over Passion podcast. Check it out. Subscribe if you are viewing. Just make sure you also subscribe to the channel, and we will see you soon. And definitely, there's one more thing. There is a sexual strength gauge. Take it. It's short. It's fast. You can get it done. I looked at it. The average person is getting it done under a minute, and it will give you a score. And that score is going to give you a little bit of information and a little bit of tools about where you may be in the whole aspect. So check that out as well. All right. Great to have you. It's Purpose Over Passion. Be blessed.
Take care.